Hey everyone and welcome. We're here to feed my worms today, and boy is it humid. You could tell because these frozen foods that I bought downstairs a little while ago, they're just sweating like crazy, so the condensation in the air is collecting on these frozen bags because it's so humid. But as you can see, I'm once again in overload mode, so no more room in the freezer, spurring me on to another feeding session, but it's also because it's been a number of days now. So those, we're not going to be touching these two bins on the top shelf here. These two bins have been in horizontal migration mode for 5 days now, and I think it's still early enough that we can just leave them be. There was a fairly generous feeding placed into those bins. But these other bins over here, these two regular red wiggler bins, they've been going for about 8 days now, and they're due for some food. And these Nightcrawler bins have been going for 10 days now, since they were originally set up. And you got the European Nightcrawlers are in this one, African Nightcrawlers in the one behind. Significant population difference. This one was started with what originated as 500 cocoons, and this is what originated as 100 cocoons. So I'm expecting hopefully to see a lot more worms in this one, and hopefully at least some worms in here, but they're both due for some food, even though the one in the back might not have been depleted as much because of the much smaller population. So I'm going to get these bins up onto the table and feed, so let's see if we can spot some worms. Okay, so now here we have African Nightcrawlers on the left, and the African Nightcrawlers were a small population of 100 that came out of my time-lapse bin, so I'm not quite sure how many to expect in here. But in here, the European Nightcrawlers came out of a bin that was launched off with 500 cocoons, significantly more, and they had a lot more space to roam in. So I'm assuming we're going to see a lot more worms over in this bin here. So let's just grab something that we could place these leaves into temporarily. European Nightcrawlers, presumably a greater sized population than the Africans. And for that reason, there's a little bit more material in this bin for them. Basically because the container that they came out of was larger to start with, and I did try to add a little bit more food into this bin for them as well, with the assumption that we've got more worms to feed in here. So as we start to make our way down, we can start to see European Nightcrawlers cruising around. Here's a corn cob that they were fed some time ago, but it's coming along pretty good. It's already so eaten up that there's hardly any sidewall left, so they've kind of chewed it out from the inside. That appears to be the way that they prefer to consume the corn, from the inside out. And I guess I'll try to get a little peek lower. So here and there we do see larger concentrations of worms hanging out here and there. Not bad. Some of these are a little bit more mature, a little bit larger in size. Others are kind of tiny still. And today I figured we would give them a nice treat. We're going to give them a few pieces of watermelon, which will presumably be gone in no time, because we all know how worms love watermelon. Okay. I also have some potato peels here, which I assume they like as well. So I'm not going to bother with adding any more leaves, because the leaves we plucked off the top I think should be adequate to cover things up here. Return these leaves that we removed back up as a covering. So it seems to me like things are progressing pretty good in this container. We'll just get everything else back on top here. So now this leads us to the African Nightcrawlers. Let's remove some of this leaf cover that's on here. Let's see if we can poke around in here a little bit and see what we see. Alright. It's a good sign. I could already see a few worms hanging out here and there. There's one, there's another one. It's pretty promising. Over on this side too, I can see a few. And I can't remember what I fed these bins originally, when I originally built them, but I think I used something pretty delectable. It might have been watermelon at that point as well. But I don't see any signs of any previous foods. Like I said, I didn't expect to see quite as many worms in this bin as I did in the other one. But we'll give them a pretty hearty feeding too. Maybe not. It might be excessive to give them as much as the Euros got, because there are significantly fewer worms in this bin. But we'll give them the same assortment of some potatoes and some melon, and then we'll get them covered back up. Alrighty. And it does seem like the leaves were more abundant in this one as well, so that suggests that the Euros are actually consuming the leaves as well. So I think that I started out with an equal amount of leaves, if not more, in the Euro bin. So it does seem like they're digging the leaves and consuming them as food. So that looks pretty good. Let's get these pots covered up. So now our Nightcrawlers have been fed. And we'll move on to the red wigglers. Here's some more of our little creepy crawly friends. And usually I don't see them moving around until I disturb things a little bit, so it does seem like there's a little congregation of them hanging out here and there. It could be because my supply of diatomaceous earth on this piece of paper has dwindled, so maybe we'll sprinkle a little bit more on here before we return this bin back to the shelf. Okay, just going to try to get these little sprouts out. And it does seem like we've got fewer sprouts in this bin than we've been seeing in our other bins lately, so hopefully that's a good sign. This bin was pretty generously fed last time we were here, as I recall, right down the middle here. So I'm curious to see if we're going to see any traces of the food that was in here. You can definitely see an abundance of worms already right beneath the castings. And I already think I see some traces of some of the food that they were fed last time. The castings right above the feeding zone are quite damp, which is also a normal thing to observe. Now what do we have here? This is kind of surprising to see a piece of melon this size remaining after 8 days in a worm bin with this many worms. So what do we have down here? Down here we've got some of these slower composting items, such as these mango seeds. But here's another piece of melon rind. Actually a little bit surprised to see so many leftovers from the previous feeding still in here. Here too, a pretty good size piece of melon with the coffee that was sprinkled onto it still here. Interesting. I wonder if it has something to do with the warm weather we've been having. I wonder if it might be slowing them down. On the contrary, I thought it was the opposite. I thought the worms tend to thrive in the warm weather, but maybe that's different types of worms. These are red wigglers. So we'll, I guess we'll just set some of these older hunks of food off to the side. And let's see now, here too, it's another piece of melon rind. Pretty heavily populated with worms, but at least that piece has been stripped clean of its pink, fleshy, meaty part of the fruit. Aha, okay. I think down here is what may have been quinoa. And I can't remember if it was this container or the other container where we actually disrupted the quinoa from being kind of a big mass, and we spread it around a little bit. But it also has kind of a funky odor to it, so I'm curious to see what we're going to encounter when we get to the other bin where the I believe it was the other bin where the quinoa was less disturbed and less spread out throughout the bin. So that's interesting to see. Hopefully at some point soon they're going to be interested in eating it, because right now it seems like they're just leaving it be. And it is a bit stinky, so I don't like having stinky stuff down in my bin, but whatever, we're just going to leave it be for now. Let's return these partially eaten pieces of melon back down into the pit, and we'll just throw in a few more fresh chunks of food for them. And here's a couple pieces of melon that didn't all get eaten by the Nightcrawlers, as well as some of the potato I had intended to give to the Nightcrawlers remaining. We'll give them to these guys too. Here we've got a variety of greens, parsley I believe, and some cucumber shavings and cuttings. And we can give them some banana peel as well. But since they didn't finish off what we gave them last time, I think that should be adequate for now as far as a feeding. So get these guys back over on top of the food supply. Take a peek over on this side how things are progressing. Surprised at the high moisture content of this material. It's probably attestable to the high humidity we've been having around here lately in central Jersey. But for the most part, the material is quite nice castings throughout. I might have made that same observation last time we were looking around in this bin. So that's a nice thing to see. Pretty much nice castings all around. Nice dense population of worms everywhere, especially down in the feeding zone. Here and there we've just got big lumps of worms gathering together, probably working down some delicious food item that they were all sharing. So now others have told me just get rid of that piece of paper with the creepy crawlies all over it. But I guess I'm more interested in seeing how the diatomaceous earth does. And it seems that my supply of diatomaceous earth on this piece of paper has pretty much run out, so I think I'm going to give this a little bit of a fresh treatment around the edge here and see if that helps knock out some of these little guys. Okay. Now previously I had used a device to try to spread this stuff out nice and evenly, nice and sprinkly all over the place, but I'm not going to go bananas with this right now. I'm just going to apply a little bit, try to get it all the way around. Give it a little shake, and we'll leave it at that. You can tell they don't like it, or at least it appears that they don't like it. And I think I've gotten the majority of them. So we'll see if this stuff really does what it's supposed to do. See if it starts knocking these little guys out. And we'll just cover up and get the last bin out here to be fed. Okay. Now in the case of this bin, we had gone looking for creepy crawlies. Presumably they're mites, but it's not certain. And we didn't really see any signs of them last time, but I believe right off the bat I could see a couple of them cruising around over here. Let's see if I could spot any more of them. I mean, just to see one or two of them, it's a huge improvement over what had been observed here previously. Because previously both bins had their top papers covered in these little guys running around. But just to play it safe, I'm going to give this piece of paper a little treatment of this stuff as well. Okay. And we'll just jostle things around here a little bit. See if that causes any of them to become more visible. So here, you can see one cruising around. Over here too, I could see a couple. Not nearly as many as the other one though. All right. Okay, so this will just become worm food, as will these other sprouts. And as far as the diatomaceous earth and the worms, I mean, I just heard somewhere that this stuff actually plays a pretty good role in terms of being utilized by the worms as grit. So it's okay for the worms to get it in the bin, and it's not going to cause them any harm or any distress. I can already see worms pulling away as I remove this top layer of compost. Here we've got a couple slow composting items right at the top. Here's some corn cobs. I'll just move them to the side here. The slow composting items seem to be a lot higher in this bin. So I'm not sure if I had fed underneath them and then placed the slow composting items on top. Is that why? Maybe. That's what it looks like. It looks like the previous feeding was laid down low, and then the slow composting food items that have been in here for some time now were laid on top of them. So you can see the melon gradually getting worked down. Coffee on top of it still there. And here's some of the newspaper and stuff that was laid down as bedding for them too. And I believe it was right here that we had this load of quinoa for them. So I don't really see this stuff getting consumed very much, but it still has that stinky odor like we noticed in the other bin. I believe it was maybe this piece of paper had the quinoa wrapped in it. So whatever, maybe by spreading it around, it has an opportunity to get consumed a little bit more quickly. So, all right, well, not bad. Just a little bit surprising to see watermelon last so many days without being completely eaten in a worm bin with this many hungry eaters. So I can't really explain why that is. But nevertheless, I like to keep my bins nicely stocked with food, ample supply of food. So this time we're going to drop all this older food back down into the pit, and we'll apply the new feeding over that. And it might not need to be a great deal either, because you can see there's an ample supply of existing food items in here for them already, as is. Oops, making a mess here. All right, let's get some fresh food in here for them. So here too, we've got some banana peel. We'll give these guys a few more pieces of melon, even though they haven't finished what they got before. Here's another banana peel. We'll give them a handful of greens as well, in addition to the sweets. All right. Let's see if there's any other large slow composting items off here on the edge. It belongs down in the feeding zone. All right, we'll get this thing covered up. Here too, we got some really nice compost throughout this bin. At some point I'm wondering if I might just remove all of these slow composting food items, and then just start feeding this bin with stuff that has a better chance of getting broken down quickly, so that at some point the bin can be harvested. But I've been a lot more careful feeding these bins, trying to use foods that will be eaten up entirely, and that's obviously with the exception of the slow composting food items on the bottom. I guess their attention gets redirected from eating those slow composting food items every time I add a new dose of melon or banana peel or something, so I could see why they would kind of not pay attention to the slow composting food items in the presence of those other softer, more delectable food items. Here's the cork, which I guess will go right back down in the middle like it always does. And then we'll also, next to the cork, we'll just drop in these sprouts that we pulled down in the beginning. Alright, so I guess with that we'll just cover up and call it a day. Just get this diatomaceous earth treated piece of paper back on top, and we'll continue to observe how this stuff does, trying to knock out the little critters in our bin. So I guess with that I'm going to bid everyone farewell, and if you enjoyed the video, then please remember to give it a thumbs up. I always appreciate that, and every time you give my video a like, also consider signing up to become a subscriber to the channel. That's always appreciated as well. So, alright everyone, have a great day. Bye now.